Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we're taking a really fascinating deep dive into a topic that completely bridges the gap between those massive, complex legal doctrines and, well, our everyday lives. Seriously, have you ever looked at a giant legal document and just thought it was a totally intimidating wall of text? Well, by the time we wrap up today, we're going to take those dense legal ideas and transform them into an empowering, incredibly practical tool that you can actually use. We're talking all about the Amparo in the context of health services. My ultimate goal here is to show you exactly how the law is actually designed to be your personal shield.
But before we really get into the weeds of the legal mechanics, let's ground this in reality. A pretty stark reality, actually. Just imagine for a second that you or a loved one are facing a critical illness. Picture a parent of a child with cancer sitting there in a hospital waiting room, only to be told by the administration that the absolutely crucial chemotherapy medication they need is simply out of stock. What do you do then? Do you just go home and wait? This isn't just some abstract hypothetical. It's a heartbreaking reality for way too many people. When the whole system fails, where do you turn? That exact question is what makes the legal framework we're exploring today so profoundly important for all of us.
All right, so here's our roadmap for today. 1. The right to health. 2. The international promise. 3. Reality and the court. 4. Real cases and precedents. And finally, number 5, your tool, the Amparo.
Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, the right to health. We're building the foundation of your rights here. We so often think of laws as these strict rules restricting us, right? But here, the law is actually a blueprint of what you are owed. We've got international law, this vast web of treaties that define global standards, and it works in this incredibly powerful synergy with national law, specifically rooted in Article 4 of the Mexican Constitution. So the right to health isn't just some local suggestion. This global consensus directly feeds right into the national guarantee, creating a rock-solid legal foundation that exists to protect you.
Just look at the undeniable clarity of this. Every person has the right to the protection of health. Notice how it doesn't say every person who can afford it, or every person, when the government's budget allows. No way. It is a universal constitutional mandate. This single sentence in Article 4 is the absolute anchor for everything we are talking about today. It flat out establishes that access to healthcare services is a fundamental right. It is not a privilege.
Moving right along to Section 2, the international promise. Let's look at the global consensus on health.
So these are the absolute heavy hitters of international human rights law. We've got the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the Protocol of San Salvador. Now, these aren't just feel-good symbolic documents. They legally bind the state. For example, the Convention on the Rights of the Child specifically demands that no child be deprived of health services, explicitly emphasizing that infant mortality must be reduced and medical assistance guaranteed. Essentially, the state has literally signed a binding contract with the world to prioritize your health.
If we completely strip away all the dense, complex legalese of those international conventions, we are left with this core, incredibly empowering essence. The state has an undeniable duty to reduce infant mortality, actively fight disease, and guarantee medical assistance to absolutely everyone. That is the promise. But, well, what actually happens when that promise gets broken?
Which brings us to Section 3, reality and the court. What happens when the system fails?
Let's trace this legal battle on a timeline because it really tells a story. Before 2020, there were always general issues with healthcare access, but then the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and man, this period saw a massive surge in citizens fighting for access to vaccines and essential treatments, actively using legal mechanisms because the healthcare system was just completely overwhelmed. But the absolute most pivotal moment for our discussion today happened fairly recently, April 12, 2023. The First Chamber of the Supreme Court of Justice of the nation issued a landmark ruling in Amparo and Review 82-2022. Now, this wasn't just about pandemic emergencies anymore. This was specifically about a hospital of the Mexican Social Security Institute, the IMSS, failing to provide general medications in a timely manner.
And this just brilliantly illustrates the power of the highest court. The Supreme Court ruled that omitting the supply of medicines is not just some, logistical error or a minor administrative hiccup. It is a direct violation of Articles 1 and 4 of the Constitution. The court declared that failing to provide medication in an adequate, timely, and permanent manner is a literal restriction of the fundamental right to health and Social Security. This was a massive win for everyday citizens. It established a super clear standard. If the state fails to provide medicine, that is unconstitutional.
Let's jump into Section 4, Real Cases and Precedents. Let's look at how the law actually interprets authority.
Okay, get this. Here is a truly surprising legal fact. In the eyes of the law, an act of authority, or an acto de autoridad, isn't always something the government actually does. Sometimes doing absolutely nothing is the offense. An omission, like a hospital withholding cancer medication or just dragging their feet and failing to provide a timely surgery, legally counts as an actionable act. Our sources even point to a precedent where a private insurer rejecting a policy for a disabled minor was successfully challenged. The law fully recognizes that doing nothing, especially when you have a direct duty to care, is a punishable failure that violates basic equality and non-discrimination.
Let's break down some specific legal precedents that the courts have laid out. First off, a lack of budget is absolutely no excuse. The courts have explicitly ruled that the state must ensure the supply and distribution of vaccines without sacrificing quality just to save some money. Period. Second, and this is a literal lifesaver, there's something called a de plano suspension. What this means is that if a hospital's omission is literally putting your life in danger, a judge can order that hospital to provide the medical services immediately, right then and there, while the actual trial is still ongoing. And finally, the courts provide strict protection against intersecting discrimination, ensuring that the most vulnerable people in society are prioritized, not marginalized.
And that leads us to our final section, Section 5, your tool, the Amparo. It is time to talk about taking action.
So, we've talked about the rights, we've talked about the promises, and we've talked about the courts. Now, I want to introduce you to the real hero of our narrative, the Amparo. Simply put, it is your personal legal shield. When the state or an authority acts negligently, or if they just completely omit their duty to provide you with health care, the Amparo is the legal mechanism you activate to aggressively demand your fundamental rights. It's basically a direct request to a federal judge to step in, intervene, and force that authority to comply with the Constitution. It takes you right out of that terrible state of frustration and helplessness and places a remarkably powerful legal weapon right in the palm of your hand.
To make this as absolutely practical as possible, let's look at the actual forms of Amparo you can file, based on the legal dossiers and templates available. You can file an indirect Amparo specifically requesting a vaccine. You can file one to request missing medication. You can file an Amparo if a necessary surgery is being endlessly delayed for no good reason. You can even demand a consultation with a medical specialist if the system is blocking you from seeing one. And, incredibly, you can even file an Amparo to request a life-saving transplant or a necessary prosthesis. This tool isn't vague, it's highly specific and designed to address your exact real-world healthcare needs.
Wow, okay, we've definitely covered a lot of ground today, right? From those big international human rights treaties all the way down to the specific legal forms you can file when a hospital pharmacy tells you they're empty. The single most important takeaway from this explainer is this: health is a fundamental human right. It is not a privilege that is somehow contingent on administrative efficiency or government budget surpluses. The highest courts have confirmed this time and time again. The laws, the Constitution, and the global treaties are already written to protect you. The mechanism to actually enforce them exists right now. So the only real question left is, if the time ever comes, are you ready to use them? Thank you so much for joining me to explore this incredibly vital topic. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.